Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who to wish for and build. Today, we're going to be doing a Constellation Zero Abyss Showdown between our favorite dog boy Cyno and our favorite fake cat girl Keqing to find out who is the best Electro DPS in the Dendro era, and to find out if Cyno is worth the upgrade over the character you already lost your 50-50 to. Let's get started right away. We're going to start off round one with the Ruin Guards, 4 consecutive Ruin Guards. So I'd say this is very disadvantageous for Cyno because of how his longer field time requirement. Multi-wave enemies are where he struggles the most, where Keqing, because of her quick swap playstyle, is able to constantly reset, for example, the Dendro application to remove the Electro immunity from the Ruin enemies. Whereas Cyno, I've got to do some kind of janky things where sometimes I'm finishing a wave without using Cyno's burst, so I don't start a huge rotation with Cyno, and then saving his damage for the next wave. And so we're missing out on a lot of damage that we could be getting, but nevertheless he's still clearing fairly well. And he's running his Hyper Bloom team with Nahida, Yelan, and Kuki, whereas Keqing running her Aggravate team without a healer. I opted for more damage with Nahida instead of the healer Yao Yao. The Abyss Blessing for both, not really a factor here as it buffs Dendro damage, and neither of these are doing actual Dendro damage. But you can see that even though Keqing was in the lead, that they end up clearing it pretty much exactly the same time. Now it's time to look at the builds, see how they differ, how they're similar, compare it to your potential builds that you might have for your characters, and really give you some context behind what's going on with these characters. How do their artifacts stack up against each other? How do their team's artifacts stand up against each other? Because if you don't really have that context, it's hard to really know, yes, I'm watching 2 comparisons of the Showdown, but what does that really mean? Cyno is rocking the Deathmatch, and Keqing is using the Black Sword. Basically the same exact weapon, they both give some crit rate, and that's basically all they're using for. Neither one is using the passive particularly effectively, both use it just a little bit. They're actually both sharing an artifact set, so both of them are using this exact artifact set. I just swapped one for the other when I was doing the Showdown. This is actually, I would say, a pretty good artifact set. We have a couple of pieces that really carry us, like this piece. It's okay, it's pretty solid actually. The Goblet, nothing crazy, has some crit damage, some elemental mastery, some crit rate. It's a pretty decent goblet for sure. The Sands is also really good. The Feather, very good too. And the Flower, really good. Honestly, this is one of my better builds. This is a really high value build. I would say that it matters a bit more on Keqing, the build that she has, just because Cyno, a bunch of his damage is coming from the Hyper Blooms. And so it's a bit more utilized on Keqing, but it's still, Cyno is doing a ton of damage from this as well. My talents are only 8 and 8 on Cyno and 8 and 8 on Keqing, so there's definitely room to grow there. So even if your artifacts aren't quite as good as mine, you can maybe make up for that with some talents. My Keqing is Constellation 1, but it only gives 50% of attack as damage, so it's really not actually very much damage at all. And my Cyno is at Constellation 0. I am using Yelan. She is with C1, which is unfortunate for my testing purposes, but I'm not using a 5-star weapon or a different kind of weapon to compensate it. So the Constellation 1, aside from just a tiny bit of extra team energy generation, it's really not doing very much. Both characters are using Nahida. Nahida is probably the character out of my team that can be improved the most. Her crit ratio is not really that good. Her elemental mastery is pretty low. The weapon isn't even level 90 yet. Her talents are only 8 and 7. Really a lot of room to grow. Both my teams could be doing quite a bit more damage because Nahida's damage is nothing to scoff at all. And then my Kazuha, he's got okay artifacts, they're nothing special. Cyno's also running Kuki. She's using 921 elemental mastery, level 80 elemental mastery sword, and just a full set of Gilded Dreams. And let's go to round 2. For round 2, it's definitely one of the more challenging Abyss Chambers we've had in a long time. These enemies, not really the first 3, but the second 2 desert enemies do an absolute ton of damage, and both of these characters are very melee, and I'm running both characters without a shield. My previous Abyss Showdowns, I ran these, I wasn't able to run these enemies without a shield, but after playing the Abyss quite a number of times, I was able to get a handle on their attack patterns and knowing when to be invincible and when to not be. And so this was the result of many different trial and errors. I definitely wouldn't expect someone to get these on their first try, and as a result I was able to not have quite optimal rotations, and you can see Keqing is going to finish this up pretty quick here. And I did cheat a little bit because I am using the Abyss Blessing that heals every time you use your burst, and so that's maybe a little bit unfair. The next thing I like to talk about is teammate flexibility and enemy flexibility. What kind of enemies are these characters good against, and what kind of teams do they work with? I would say Cyno may be a bit more flexible, but also not at the same time, and you'll see what I mean. Cyno can work pretty well, for example, in Hyper Bloom, Hyper Burgeon, whereas you use Toma instead of Keqing. He works okay in National and okay in Double Hydro, Electrocharge, whereas Keqing, a lot of her value comes from how well she can drive Fischl, and so when you lose that, she loses a lot of value as a carry. For her to be utilized properly, she's always going to be using a Dendro unit, Fischl, Hong Li, if you really want a shield, or a Kazuha or Sucrose. And those are basically the only really good options you have for Keqing. Of course, you can do a Double Hydro. It can work. I have done it. She can clear with Double Hydro because Double Hydro is just such a broken core. And you can, do a meme physical or a meme cryo Keqing build, or just a hyper Keqing build with Kujo Sara and just use her as a budget ride in Shogun. But none of those really make Keqing shine. Keqing needs Fischl to shine. I just realized I totally skipped actually showing off my Fischl, which is really bad because Fischl does a ton of damage, but hey, at least we're showing it off here. Fischl is a huge part of Keqing's team, arguably more important than Keqing herself. She's running Refined of 5 the string list, and her artifacts are a 2-piece Gladiators, 2-piece Wanderer's Troop. And let's take a look at her crit ratio. Yeah, 60, 147 for a build without a 5-star weapon, or without a crit rate or crit damage weapon. 0 over 200 crit value. But because it's a 2-piece, it's nothing crazy. It's definitely something that could have just as good or better. My talent is only level 8, and then level 11 after the constellation. So, and then looking at against enemy types, I would say that Cyno is much better versus single target, and then works pretty well when it's a small amount of AoE, so 2 or 3 enemies that they're already grouped up. His Hyper Bloom teams are naturally very strong single target. He has some AoE on his attack, so that's kind of where he shines. Keqing, I'd say she struggles the most in single target. It's always much harder to 36-star with her when it's just a single target, and she really shines in multi-wave groupable content where you can abuse Kazuha, you can abuse Fischl's A4, you can abuse switching and going to Nahida. And so I would say that's where I would recommend that. To compare these two characters, I actually don't love comparing these two characters. I know people love to say that, you don't need Cyno, you already have Keqing. I would say they really fulfill different roles. I would pick Keqing every single time over Kazuha in groupable multi-wave content, and I would pick Cyno over Keqing every single time in single target content. And I think you'll see that coming up in round 3, and round 4 we're going to show back to back. For the third round, we're actually going to be fighting against the, can you even read that? The Dorito, the big Dorito. And this is going to be a really interesting fight because it definitely favors Cyno because his single target with Hyper Bloom is much stronger. You can see the auto targeting is messing us up a little bit, but basically they are running fairly neck and neck. But as soon as we get to the point where Cyno can really get into his rotation, he really starts to pull ahead. And Keqing, definitely no slouch in single target here, but not doing it nearly as fast. And you can see she's closing the gap quite a bit, as Cyno has to set up for his next rotation. But now that he's into his final rotation, he's going to finish it off quite quickly, whereas Keqing is not able to finish it off in that rotation, and as a result we have to clear down his weak point again. And I do mess up the swirl with Kazuha there and don't infuse it with Electro, and therefore we were barely able to do too much damage on that burst. So I would have been able to clear this a few seconds sooner with Keqing. I have seen some. The final showcase that we're going to do, because we've seen 2 rounds where both Keqing and Cyno did almost exactly the same, which was in a pseudo AoE with 2 or 3 enemies, and then single target but multi-wave, and then now we're doing true AoE. And this is the chamber, I would say, if the last chamber was the one that really showed off Cyno's strengths and where Keqing kind of falls a little bit behind, this is the chamber that really shows Keqing's strengths. And the reason why is basically just her synergy with Kazuha. And I would say that of all the things that, when we're comparing these two characters, of all the things that makes Keqing arguably a stronger character or a better character is her synergy with Kazuha. And I think it's her synergy with Kazuha that makes her such a good character in AoE because this quick swap potential, she has 100% uptime on the Viridust Inventor, and it's just so smooth to play. Whereas basically looking at the results from this DPS showdown, who of these two characters would I'd say actually wins the showdown? Is there a winner? In my opinion, no. I would pick Cyno every time for single target, and I would choose Keqing every single time for multi-wave content. Cyno is really, really bad in multi-wave content. In terms of account value, Keqing obviously has more account value in the sense that you didn't really have to pay anything for her. You just got her from losing your 50-50. If I were to put her on the tier list next to Cyno, which I did put her on the tier list right next to Cyno, I pretty much put them right at the same spot. If you want to see me compare every single character, and if you want to see a deep dive on Cyno and my in-depth thoughts on him, check out that video over there. Take care.